Chapter 1. Brynn Larkin stood in a corner of her childhood home like an overlooked statue. Arms crossed over her chest, she took a sip of the twisted tea left out for the adult party guests. She peered out from her favorite corner of the living room as she watched her 12-year-old half-siblings open their birthday presents. Their giddiness as they ripped open the colorful wrapping paper was almost enough to distract her from the cold and empty backs of her dad and stepmom. Almost enough. The can still pressed against her lips. The aluminum had long gone warm now, but it was a useful excuse to hide her mouth. The pungent smell of alcohol kept her mind busy. Anything to beat back seeing the memory of their hollow gazes when they looked at her. She swallowed a breath to stifle the constricting sensation in her throat before it could start stinging her eyes. Letting her mind wander to brighter places, she focused on Riley's and Quinn's beaming faces when she'd privately passed them their presents. For Riley, she'd bought a bright red remote control car. A vintage Dodge Challenger. It had taken so many weekend garage sale trips between jobs and her college coursework, but she'd finally found his favorite car in his favorite color. And Quinn loved journaling, so buying a journal seemed like a no-brainer. But finding one that had her favorite animal, the Japanese tanuki with a pastel color scheme, had been its own challenge. With wrapping paper blanketing the floor, the cake was sliced and divvied up. Once the two finished eating, she could hug them goodbye and slip out without fuss. While the kids stuffed their faces, Brynn kept post in her corner. No one passed her a plate, nor did she want to get one when it inevitably meant facing her stepmom. Besides, her stomach was roiling with nausea anyway. Once Riley and Quinn left the kitchen, she moved from her corner and followed them outside. Riley, Quinn. They whirled around. Brynn. Riley's voice was loud, and if he'd said that indoors, her eardrums just might have blown. That thought left her fighting a smile. As he smacked into her, she closed her arms around him, only to pull Quinn in a moment later when she hovered awkwardly around them. You're leaving now, aren't you? She asked, her voice low. Brynn hesitated. What? Riley said, tipping his head back. Already? Riley, shh. It's better for Brynn to leave now, Quinn said, before peeking up at her. Isn't it? A catch in Brynn's throat tore any honest answer from her mouth. I just have to get to work now, she said, but it sounded raspy to her own ears. Quinn smiled at her, a far too knowing smile for a 12-year-old. You both just have fun, okay? Brynn said. And you can call me whenever. Folding her arms around the two again, she squeezed them tightly. I love you both. Unwrapping them, she waved herself off and headed for the bus stop. A terrible buzzing burned in her gut as she thought about her parents, the party, her coursework, and how she should have been heading to work. But there was only one thing she could ever do after going back to a house that only felt like the ghost of her home.
Finn Whitaker stood at the center of a massive frat house's living room. Everything swirled around him, but the big Kappa Sigma sign on the wall wouldn't blend with the chaos. It kept him steady. The room packed with bodies, he bumped into several people while swaying to the rhythm of the booming bass playing over several speakers around the dance area. a vodka-laced energy drink in his hands. He let the music consume him. Rainbow lights bounced around the room from a tiny rotating ball he couldn't remember the name of, but he watched as they changed the tint of everyone's skin they touched. Purples, greens, blues, oranges, yellows. They scattered the space, and his eyes tried to catch them, his gaze flitting from side to side. He stumbled, the world spinning around him. I wish I had 10 eyes. He laughed as his thoughts conjured the image of himself with eyes stacked on his forehead. When his mind cleared, he focused on the sights ahead of him, though it all kept tipping in weird angles. Blinking a few times, he shook his head, his eyes falling on blonde hair that reflected back brilliant, vibrant colors. His mind's eye watched a leprechaun chasing a pot of gold across a rainbow bridge. But his gaze drifted to blue eyes. They reminded him of the crystal-clear lake his parents used to take him and his sister to when he was old enough to remember, but young enough to question if it was all just a dream. A tug in his chest sent chilling goosebumps along his skin. The spinning room slowed. Shapes took on meaning again, as chairs, tables, couches, people. His gaze wandered back to those blue eyes he recognized. Elaine. She tipped her head, cheek meeting her shoulder, as her eyes softened like a fox. The coy smile on her lips welcomed him like a baited trap. He chuckled, returning his own inviting smirk before he looked away. Elaine likes the chase. Without meeting her eyes again, he inched closer to her, his thoughts racing with every bait and switch. His heart pounded with the thrill. "Hey," she said when he was close enough to hear her over the bone-rattling beats. "Hi," he said. "Good party." But she sounded bored. He said, pushing his focus to the wall behind her. "Is it?" Silence in the din returned his question. Glancing back, he found her smirking. "Did you have something better in mind?" His lips threatened to pull into a champion's grin. Leaning down, he brought his mouth near her jaw. "Doesn't your place have a better stereo system?" he breathed, letting his lips brush her ear with every word. "I think I remember it covering your screams." She sucked in a nearly gasping breath. He pulled back, searching her eyes. The lust he saw in them was like the first sight of the finish line. "It just so happens that my parents are out of town this week," she said. He cocked an eyebrow. "Want to go?" "Sure," he said, and as they wove their way through the party, Finn congratulated himself with a few shots left in the kitchen. By the time they made it to Elaine's car, the world started spinning again, and everything turned into a blur until his eyes fluttered open to a dark room. Finn blinked several times, trying to clear the blurriness from his vision. When he brought his palms to his eyes to rub them free of the haze, a sharp slice cut through his head. He groaned. Movement and an echoing groan alerted him to the other side of the bed. Elaine stirred under the sheets. "Elaine?" He stared at her, his brows furrowing, but that was a mistake because it sent another splitting cut through his skull as he tried to piece back his memory of the fragmented night. While also keeping his head still, he glanced around. Spotting his pants, he slowly got up from the bed and searched the pockets. His head pounding mercilessly, he found his phone nestled into the back pocket. Before waking it up, he went back to the bed and laid back. Thank you, God. Any God, all the gods, whichever God or saint or whoever helped me find my phone this quickly. Amen. He pressed the home button and the screen lit up, showing a message from his sister on the lock screen. What the hell? Unlocking the phone, he swiped through it until he got to the message. Jackass, it started. Put some kind of drunk blocking app on your phone. What are you, a fucking niffler? He grimaced at the reference. Calling me like 1,239,384 times? This isn't even the first time. And stop bringing up shit about our parents. They suck, but if they hear you rambling like that, they'll cut you off and maybe me too. So just let it fucking go already. He blinked, rereading the messages before flipping through his call log. Sure enough, it was filled with outgoing calls to Rose. He dove through his shoddy memory again and pulled out a vague recollection of speaking to her voicemail. His chest deflated, and that sent another sharp pang through his head. Swiping through his phone, he tapped on the Photos app. He scrolled and scrolled, looking for one photo. When he found it, he stared at the younger version of his family, on some vacation in a place whose name he couldn't even remember. They stared at the camera, and he looked at everyone's eyes. Letting out a slow breath, Finn sighed. Finn? Shit. Forming his lips into a smile, he turned over to Elaine. Good morning, he said.
Brynn spent the ride back to College Town staring out the window of the packed county bus. Carried on the wind, leaves in varied shades of autumn red, pocked her view of the desolate roads surrounded by litter and highway walls. She tried to focus on them instead of the past 12 years flickering in every blink. A flash of her mom in a picture frame, tears sliding down the glass, popped into her head. She felt her fingernails dig into her palm. The memory pushed forward, dragging her into the next part. The part that filled her chest with dread. The smaller, younger Brynn glanced up from the photo as her bedroom door opened. Her stepmom, belly bulging with the twins, walked into little Brynn's room. Her eyes whipped from little Brynn to the photo in her hands. Her stepmom burst into tears of her own. For a moment, little Brynn thought her new stepmom was feeling with her. And then she cried out, falling to her knees. "Why am I not enough?" she'd said. "Why am I not enough for you?" Little Brynn froze in confusion. She didn't understand, and she didn't know what would come next. Brynn shook her head, trying to free herself of it all, but those memories festered like a putrid wound. With her thumb and forefinger, she rubbed the bridge of her nose and resisted the urge to pull in what she knew would be a rattling breath beside the other riders. Still, the memories clawed at the back of her throat. She knew they would keep harassing her until she could expel them all, and she couldn't do that back at the apartment with her roommates. Only the ocean's breeze and dark waters could put her ragged edges together. Once she exited the bus at the college town stop, she let her feet guide her to the secluded stone stairwell, where seawater lapped right up to the top steps. Must be high tide, she thought. The water was freezing with the chill October day, but the numbing pins and needles it struck through her feet felt like a ritual cleansing. Even though she was a gust away from bawling in a crowd of people on her ride home, now that she was alone, the tears just wouldn't come. When's the last time I actually cried? All she could think of was the day with her late mother's picture in her hands and her pregnant stepmom crying on her bedroom floor.
Finn laced up his high-top shoes, the Technicolor laces almost fluorescent against the black canvas material, when a pulsing beat shot off the walls. The melody was familiar, but only just. Finn popped his head around the corner and spotted Elaine, her figure draped in a thin silk robe. She stood under the stairs in a carved-out alcove that housed her dad's vintage and impressive stereo system, a vinyl spun in double time to the beat of the song bouncing through the hall. "Elaine," he called over the music. She glanced over, her chin resting on her shoulder. "What is this song?" She giggled, making her big blonde curls bounce as she lowered the volume. "Seriously," she said, and it dripped with sarcasm. "I mean, I know you're more of an alt-punk kind of guy, but she's everywhere right now." Elaine tipped her head to the vinyl's cover resting on the easel display by the turntable. Finn cocked an eyebrow. "Who is that?" The cover was primarily black, dark patterned tentacles slithering around a woman. Her face was the only light-toned part of the image. "You're hopeless," she said, but she pressed her finger to a corner of the cover that showed the name of the singer. "Oh," he said, one corner of his mouth quirking up when he recognized it. "Yeah, she's got some good stuff, but this is a vibe." Elaine giggled again and rolled her eyes. "Weren't you heading out?" "I was," he said, but he took a step closer until her robe brushed against his hand. "But I could stay a little longer." His gaze traced the contours of her figure. "I've got a date, remember?" she said, a smirk playing at her lips. Finn's eyes flashed back to hers, and he smiled. Right, he said, dropping his head as he stepped back. "Don't be like that," she said. "If it doesn't work out, I'll call you later." Finn turned for the door. "Yeah," he said with a simple wave. "See ya." And with that, he left, shutting the door behind him. Once outside, he instinctively searched for his car, only to remember that he'd left it at home when everyone had decided to go to the Kappa Sigma party. The night was still a blur, but unfinished pictures of his friends all leaving in a rideshare as he left with Elaine passed through his head. Leaving the porch steps, Finn glanced around the block. What should I do now? His hand flew to the back of his head as he wandered down the street in the general direction of his apartment. The cold, dark living room flashed in his mind. He blinked a few times and headed toward the remote part of the boardwalk. Why did they call it a boardwalk and not a beach walk? It was a stray thought as he looked out at the ocean that splashed right up to the ledge of the pavement. Finn set his forearms on the guardrails, letting his head hang as he considered his options. He reached for the phone in his back pocket when a flash of movement caught his eye. Red was the first thing he saw. Like a flame lit on the ocean, wild red hair danced on the wind. His eyes shifting, he realized it belonged to a girl, though girl wasn't really the right word, since she must have been about the same age as him. She sat on a set of concrete steps that led directly into the water. Pants rolled up to her upper thigh. She had one leg in the salty seawater. The other she hugged to her chest, chin on her knee, as she stared out to where the horizon met the edge of the ocean. He could barely make out her face from how far away she was, but her gaze bored into the edge of the world. His mind flashed to that old picture with his family he'd looked at earlier. Before he knew it, his feet pulled him closer.
Brynn. Brynn's jaw clenched as she peered out at the tide-rough waters, her thoughts a knotted mess when she felt a prickling at her neck. Whipping her head around, she found a guy she recognized from her Calm 360 lecture a few feet away. "Hi," he said, his mouth twitching into a lopsided smile. But it somehow emphasized his high cheekbones and stark jawline. "Hi," she said, brows pulling together as she took her foot out of the icy water. He started, looking over his shoulder down the sidewalk. "I was over there and, well," whirling back around, his clear glass gaze fell on her. "I thought it looked like," he said, and then ruffled his hair. "Fuck it. Are you okay? Am I okay?" The anger, grief, loneliness that had all been welling up in her gut bubbled like a volcano about to erupt. "When's the last time anyone asked me that?" Her eyes flew to him. Peering back at her with genuine concern, he broke the dam. She burst into tears. Turning away, she covered her face with her hands, but her fragmented breathing dashed any hopes of hiding it. She dropped her head between her knees, putting more of a barrier between her face and everything else. But hiccups started racking her whole body. Geez, why'd he have to ask that? Rivers fell from her eyes. All the caustic thoughts that had been ballooning in her head seeped out like a burst blister. Once it was all out, her breaths slowed into a more even rhythm. With her body finally calmed, she tilted her head to peek up at the guy who hadn't said a word through this whole spectacle. His back to her, he stood like a bouncer. Leaning against the guardrail, his entire frame blocked her view of the street. But it also blocked anyone passing by from seeing her too. Is that on purpose? Glancing over his shoulder, he caught her eye. "Oh," he said, an apologetic smile quirking his lips. "Sorry." She buried her head between her knees again, hugging her arms around them. "It's not your fault," she said. But she wasn't sure he heard the muffled words. Sounds of shifting fabric drew her gaze back to him. "Look," he said, as he kneeled down to meet her at eye level. "I know I'm just some guy, but I'll hear you out if you want." Her chest tightened, and she swallowed hard. but that put an avalanche of pressure behind her stuffed nose. The rims under her eyes stung. "Thanks," she said, cracking out a smile even as she dropped her gaze. "I'm fine, though. It's just been a hard day." Crashing waves replied, filling the silence, but she didn't dare meet his eyes again. "Right," he finally said, and his voice matched the levity she'd woven in hers. "Well, I hope it gets better now." She chanced a glance at him. "Yeah," she said, staring at his shoulder. "Thanks." Turning to leave, he waved, and she waved back. But once he was out of sight, all the faux brightness deflated out of her. She turned back to the twilight purples, oranges, and pinks, highlighting the horizon. "It's too pretty,"